Very nice music on a Friday morning. I'm just telling my director I wish we could have more of this, but sadly we also have to review what's making headlines this morning, and it's my pleasure to introduce in my panel Senator Moses Kajwang, Senator for County number 43, Homa Bay County, and also going for the same seat again. I also have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Ghurair, Deputy Governor Murang'a County, who says he's done with politics. He's now in business, but he still has an opinion. Once a leader, ever a leader. Of course, it was always a pleasure. Daisy Amdan, women's rights activist. She doesn't want to be called governance activist. She says she also represents those who are championing women's rights. Daisy, good morning and welcome.
Thank you.
And Gabriel Muduma. Gabriel is a governance analyst. Gabriel, good morning and welcome. A quick look at what we have in the papers today. The Daily Nation on the front page, appeal judges clear way for the August polls. Now, bench gives IEBC a green light to print presidential ballot papers in Dubai. More of this on page 4 and 5. Remember, there was an appeal in court over whether IEBC should go on using Ghurair from Dubai to print the presidential ballot papers. One of the arguments fronted by the judges yesterday was that data fixed of the whole process has a challenge. Does not mean you cancel the whole process. We'll be looking at that in detail. This is just about 17 days before we head to the polls. Another story that has been mentioned is covered up in the back page of the Daily Nation. Police told to get ready for new pay deal, and one of the world's richest, actually Asia's richest mogul is in town. Jack Ma, the owner of Alibaba, a company that trades via the web, is around the country. Apparently is touted as being as wealthy as almost 1.5 times the GDP of a country called Kenya. Stories about the burial of the late former cabinet minister Nicholas Kiprono Kipiator Biwot in Elgeyo Marakwet are covered on page 2 of the Daily Nation. Quite a somber mood. An event attended by President Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy William Ruto. And we also have stories about the life and times of Nicholas Biwot as told by his peers back then. As I told you earlier, page 4 and 5 of the Daily Nation have stories about the decision by the High Court, the Court of Appeal, over the printing of the presidential ballot papers. NASA presidential candidate Raila Odinga, through his spokesman Salim Lone, says, well, we will respect the decision of the court. We will go ahead and prepare for the elections as we had been doing before. Apparently, it is not the end of the road, because there are more cases standing in ahead of the August 8th polls. There are 3 more cases of note in the High Court now, in court now. One is by rights activist Gladwell Otieno, who filed a suit against IEBC for failing to publish the voter register as is required by the law. Then there is a case about the commission being challenged, that should the electronic systems fail, should technology fail on August 8th, then the commission has no option but to stop the elections and prepare afresh. This has been filed by NASA. And then, of course, there is a case in Kisumu where some voters have gone to court seeking to have the commission announce presidential election results within 7 hours after the end of voting. That is at 5 p.m. on the 8th of August this year. Stories about allegations by NASA presidential flag bearer Raila Odinga over the involvement of police in vote rigging is aptly covered on page 6 of the Daily Nation. And of course, the African Union Commission boss Musa Faki is in the country meeting different stakeholders ahead of the elections on August 8th. A sad story that is in everybody's mind now is the state of health, especially Nairobi County, in regard to cholera, the closure of eating joints, more so the ongoing strike by nurses. We'll be looking at that in detail. The Standard, a quick look, frontline, it's all systems go. 17 days ahead of the polls. Victory for IEBC as appeal court gives green light to Ghurair ballot papers, arguing that polls body was justified to go for direct procurement because of the pressing electoral timelines. One of the arguments the judges fronted, like I told you about the Nation in the Standard, was that the 8th August is a constitutional date and is of public interest, that any decision around it should be influenced by making sure that there is minimal alterations to it. Al-Shabaab university student surrenders over investigations. A Moi University student says his photo has appeared as one of the people who are being sought for and who have a bounty on their head, and so he surrenders himself. The visit by Jack Ma, Asia's richest person and founder of Alibaba, a Chinese e-commerce company, brings 38 billionaires with him to the country. He's said to be worth 3.67 trillion, and he has created 100 million jobs through his company. Other stories in the Standard: 12 more cases reported over cholera across the city of Nairobi, even as different bodies set to curb the spread of this disease, including banning of eating in open places, including suspension of operations in certain eateries and eating places. Of course, the story about Alibaba's founder, Jack Ma, covered in more details on page 4 of the Standard. The IEBC win appeal on ballot papers is on page 6 of the Standard, and people look at the implications, like we will be doing in a short while, about that ruling on page 8 of the Standard. A quick one, and I will start with you, Gabriel. Who has won and who has lost in this?
Thank you very much, and good morning to our viewers. And number one, before even I delve into that, I think it's we've played politics so much that we don't even recognize when a very revered person like Jack Ma comes to town. And probably, probably what I would encourage is for our young men who are entrepreneurial to go and listen to this man. He has a very great history. If he tells you, I mean, this is somebody who failed so many times. He could not even get work to a fast food restaurant. So I mean, for him to have dug into his senses and his abilities and to be one of the richest men in the world, it is a story that most of our young men and women need to hear about this guy. Now, coming to the ruling that was made yesterday, I think the 45 million Kenyans won, and I want to actually step aside from the political prism where NASA and probably Jubilee they've been putting us. Jubilee had walked away, actually, from the issue of IBC, and so NASA was left. But this is not a win or a loss for NASA. I think the person who won in this case was the Kenyan people, and to an extension
of whichever divide they belong to,
and to an extension IBC. I wasn't taken by surprise, really. Let me be honest with you, because I have been trying to actually rack, the whole issue when the High Court initially gave that decision, and having the fact that they had thrown the 2 prayers that NASA had actually brought to the court. I was left wondering what public participation is, and I've actually talked to so many people about what they believed public participation to have been. And the ruling that we saw yesterday, and it did not come as a surprise, because I knew at some point, if for sure our constitution reigns supreme, the 5-person judge would have come to a conclusion where they would favor the interests of Kenyans, and I think that is what happened. So whoever won yesterday was the Kenyan people.
A win for 45 million Kenyans, Senator Moses Kajwang. Your take? I'm asking this because if you look at news, it's like there's celebration on the Jubilee divide and the IABC side, and it's gloom on the NASA side. Gabriel feels it's a win for all Kenyans. What's your take?
Indeed, Charles, good morning. Indeed, it's a win for Kenyans. Because when people go to court to seek interpretation of various laws, they don't do it with a personal interest, but in a matter as sensitive as elections. It is to ensure that when Kenyans go to vote on 8th of August, every vote that is cast will be counted and every vote will count. We don't want a situation where after the 8th of August, that is when people start saying that, we should have done this or we should have raised this and that. It is a good thing that the opposition is raising issues early, ahead of the elections. What I would expect to see today and going forward is a toning down of the rhetoric that we saw in the past 1 or 2 weeks. We saw Jubilee come out with guns blazing and the guns were pointed at the judiciary. We had very unhelpful comments at political rallies, and some of the comments were attributed to the highest office in the land and very senior people within the Jubilee establishment. This should not be seen as a celebration of a Jubilee victory over the rest of Kenyans. This should be seen as a victory and the emphasis of the supremacy of the Constitution and also of the judicial independence of what we have as a judiciary. We as NASA, and you saw the statement that we put out yesterday, was very measured. We said that we accept the ruling and we will seek other means of securing our vote. We did not condemn the judiciary, the manner in which, in the same manner in which Jubilee did when the ruling was seemed as if was against them. This should not be seen as a NASA versus Jubilee matter, but leveling the playing ground so that when Kenyans vote, the outcome of that vote then becomes acceptable to all the players.
Deputy Governor Ghurair, 2 weeks ago, like Senator Moses Kajwanga has just mentioned, we saw a tirade of attacks in public from Jubilee, a wing that you support, towards the judiciary. Are we going to see them heap praises on the judiciary today?
Good morning. Let's get to the proper setup of issues. And 8th of August is a constitutional date. And the ruling yesterday, to me, will be for the constitution of this country. When the constitution was promulgated in 2010, it anticipated that the 8th of August is the day we'll be holding our general election. In 2013, that didn't come through. So this time round, we are assured that the constitutional dispensation on the general election is going to come through. And then we set the political calendar to the 8th of August every 5 years, which, to me, the greatest win is for the constitution. Well, there were statements that were said against the judiciary, and I think, to me, to a great extent, might have not been really intended to sway the ruling on this. But you don't know, when politics are heated, you might never know what exactly one says. And Senator Kajwang will agree with me that when one is on the podium with a mic, at times you're swayed to say something which you at times never mean. And that is why you find at times politicians saying, I was misquoted, I was misunderstood, and all those things. So to me, I didn't think that that statement would really, looking at what the judgment of the Court of Appeal would be. However, the Court of Appeal has given respect to the Constitution of Kenya.
Daisy, quite interesting here. The five-member bench quoted the provisions of the Constitution. The three gentlemen who have talked so far have mentioned the Constitution. What none of them has mentioned is that the Constitution also provides for a free, fair, credible, and acceptable election. NASA say they went to court, and presidential candidate Ekuru of court say they went to court because they want the 8th August process to be done according to the Constitution. So on one end, the Constitution won. Did the Constitution also lose?
No, the Constitution has not lost because the date has not changed. For me, I think this is one case where, as Kenyans, we continually see that we are not learning from our experiences. We always do things last minute. If you recall, even in 2013, we had similar challenges, you know, on the procurement. This time, I think it was on the BVRs, where it was done last minute. So we keep doing these last minute things as though the elections are an event.
And we saw the implications.
Exactly. And so we treat elections as though it is an event and not a process. From 2013, the Electoral Commission, the legislators, and Kenyans have known that elections would be on the second Tuesday every fifth year, which is August 8th. In fact, the former commissioners, the commission under the former commissioners, actually released a very clear roadmap a year ago, detailing the various steps and the challenges now that have been brought by the politicians. So I think that our politicians across the board, both NASA and Jubilee, have contributed towards putting this country on tenterhooks unnecessarily. I think that the judgment yesterday is a victory for Kenyans, but moving forward, I think that there are better avenues that politicians can use instead of constantly casting aspersions on the integrity of independent bodies such as the judiciary or IEBC. But moving ahead, IEBC needs to also now build its confidence, because their reputation has taken a beating, because one key stakeholder feels that they are not favoring one side of the political divide, and they need to assure Kenyans that they are working round the clock to give us that free, fair and credible process. But for me, this judgment is a good judgment. In fact, personally, I was a bit surprised by the High Court judgment, because we've seen the judiciary really temper their judgments with, looking at best case scenario, public interest, where, trying to cause as little disruption as possible. So I think that this is moving us ahead, and we should all move ahead. I'm glad that NASA have committed themselves to accepting that judgment and moving ahead. So let's move ahead as a country. It is a win for us all.
Ladies and gentlemen, does this mean therefore, Gabriel, that we are okay with the presidential ballot papers when they come?
You see,
there's a case of accept and move on?
I think at this point we do not have a lot of options.
So we accept and move on.
We have to, and like Daisy said, we must commit all principal stakeholders, including the Kenyans. We must accept and abide to the spirit and commitment of what the Court of Appeal, the verdict of the Court of Appeal. Now, having said that, it's not a matter of just moving on. It's a matter of putting the interest of this nation first. And Charles, I think half of the time that's where we are getting things wrong. We are listening to the politicians as if they own the process, and we forget that we've had people who've actually ran from outside, from other countries, to come and assist this country during the period when Kenya was going through a very dark cloud. And when these people came, they brought with them a blueprint. And I remember this old man called Johansen Kriegler. When he looked at why we went the way we went in 2007, 2008, he sat and said, among the things that you need to fix is your electoral process. And he said 24 months before you go to the polling stations, all systems must be a go. Now, here we are 17 days and we are still castigating the very same body which we are told to put in place 24 months before casting our votes. So we have played, what I call cat and mouse, and the politicians have not actually aided in this process in any way. So here we are, and many Kenyans are looking this as a Jubilee versus NASA. Now, probably I would give credence to Jubilee and to the president is the way he told his brigade to get off. He did not even want to participate in matters IEBC anymore. He said, you know what, this was an institution that must be seen to be independent, hands off. All right, and I hoped and I prayed that all other candidates should have actually allowed that institution to be as independent, because at the end of the day, what we Kenyans, what you'll be asking IEBC is kindly, I have been using my tax money to ensure that you survive. Kindly give me nothing less than a credible election.
Quite ironical that you say the president did well to have his brigade pull out of the operations of an independent body a week after he was publicly criticizing an independent body.
Let's get this right, because I actually have heard both tapes, what he said. All right, the president, and I think you can bust all the tapes that are there. The president was castigating a ruling. What he told Maraga was this: kindly do not allow, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, don't allow your courts to be used. That is the word that he used. Keyword used, don't allow. And after that, we did not even wait All right, we castigated what he said. Maraga came in and actually was put on question. He had to explain himself. And I remember I was actually making the very same argument on another broadcast. And I was saying, as a Chief Justice, you should be above board. Because he was accused of preempting a judgment in Mombasa and I think in Homa Bay. And you may remember he called the media and actually chastised the media in saying, you are writing things that you see, he put himself in a situation. Of course, he put himself in a situation as a Chief Justice. And this is something I would never like to see, where he had to explain himself. Let me tell you, you know, without fear of contradiction, I think he blundered. And somebody gave a very good narrative. In the US, Donald Trump has a very loose mouth, but you cannot see a Supreme Court judge trying to play one-on-one with Trump. You know what? Because at the end of the day, there is a high chance, Charles, that he'll be misquoted. And that is exactly
Deputy Governor Ghurair, who is really to blame here? Daisy and Gabriel seem to say a lot of the problem comes from you and Senator Kajwang, the politician. Are you the ones putting us in this? Is it that when you want to fix us Kenyans, you don't care which divide you belong to? Because if you cared, we would have had the roadmap as stipulated by Johan Kriegler's report and the former commission in place 24 months ago.
Just you and I must come from the premise that there was nothing wrong other than just a perception that there will be something wrong, because nobody had seen the ballot paper. It doesn't matter who prints the ballot paper. What matters is what would the voters pick.
But
who will they vote for? Perceptions, and I remember with you one morning here, we said it doesn't matter where the ballot papers will be printed from. What matters is what will the voter pick. Who will they vote for? Tell me, where would we have problems with the presidential ballot papers? Not the gubernatorial, not what Senator Kajwang will be voted with. We only have a problem with the presidential ballot papers. It doesn't make sense at all, because the ballot papers for the other candidates are already in the country. The ones for the presidential, we were told yesterday by the CEO of IBC. Yeah, they'll be printed over the weekend. What us, both Jubilee and NASA politicians should be doing is talking to the electorate. Vote Jubilee or vote NASA. Who prints the ballot papers, to me, has no issue. And I think we must be very clear in our minds that 8th of August is when you walk into a polling booth, what will you determine is who is the next president, who is the next governor, who is the next senator, and all that. I do not know, or I don't care where the newspapers are printed from, but I'll read both papers. So whether it is printed on Mombasa Road or where,
would you care?
All I know is that I would want to read correct information.
Would you care to know if Daisy Amdan gave you 1 million shillings today in Kenyan currency and told you this money was printed by one Charles Odhiambo? Would you care to know whether it's fake or genuine?
Well, as long as it's a legal tender, I'll have no problem. As long as it has a value for the 1 million shillings.
No, she comes and tells you, by the way, this money I'm giving you was printed by Charles Odhiambo.
The only thing I'll question is it a legal tender? I do not know whether Charles will have been contracted by Ghurair or by Central Bank. But as long as it's a legal tender with a value for 1 million, I'll have the money and optimally use it. Whether it is a legal tender or not a legal tender is what is paramount. But who printed it, it doesn't matter. You have sat on your wallet for many years with your money in it. I don't think you've ever bothered to know who printed it.
I have a perception that it was printed by Ghurair.
All you've ever bothered to do is that it's a legal tender, it has value for its worth, and you've used it that way. But it's not.
Senator Kajwang, why have you people put Kenya in this situation?
Well,
I mean politicians.
Charles, I disagree with the Deputy Governor to an extent. Chicken Gate happened in this country. So we can't make it a simplistic matter and say that it doesn't matter who prints it and where it's printed. We've got Chicken Gate that is still hovering over our heads. And the concern
the Smith and Usman case.
Smith and Usman case. And the concern is if you have a process that is fraudulently put in place, then even the outcome might not inspire confidence. And that is why various players are going to the judiciary for an interpretation, so that there is no whiff of suspicion in the process. When it comes to elections, that is the one reason why Kenyans kill each other. Sport unites us. Elections divide us. It's just, I think, the DNA of the Kenyan. Maybe it's something we need to work on, so that elections should not be something that triggers an orgy of violence. Now, the issue of Justice Maraga, the judiciary, and the president and Jubilee, I was in Homa Bay, and I probably could have triggered the Chief Justice to make the remarks that he made in Homa Bay. And he gave the commitment that the judiciary was not going to impede elections on 8th of August because that is a constitutional provision. Now, I disagree that the president pulled out and did a very good thing. Remember, when Justice Odungan, when the High Court ruled that the tender to Ghurair be reversed and that the IBC to commence a fresh process of searching for a provider for the ballots for the presidential
and all-inclusive,
the IBC put in place a process. And that process required political players to make submissions and to participate and to be part of the process. By the president pulling his forces out of that process, he was sabotaging it. What if the Court of Appeal would have ruled, would have upheld the ruling of the High Court? We would be having a crisis because Jubilee had already pulled the plug. They had already pulled out. It was not statesmanship. It was really more of a contemptuous gesture or move that would have put the country on the brink of a disaster.
Fair enough. Here we are. The Court of Appeal has made a decision. It's all systems go. In 17 days, we'll be going to the polls. The presidential ballot papers should be landing here, according to IEBC CEO Ezra Chiloba, on the 3rd of August this year. You have to make sure that your ID or your passport is dusted and ready, because you have to exercise your democratic right, regardless of anything that happens now. But we cannot run away from the fact that there are 3 other serious cases in court. Your take. Let's start with you, Gabriel. The one on if technology fails, let's stop the whole thing. The one on printing, publishing of the
the
voter register, and more important, you have to announce results 7 hours after election.
Now, Charles, again, when you look at, I do not want to disenfranchise anybody, and I'll agree with Senator Kajwang here for a minute. It is not wrong to go to court. That is somebody's right. In fact, you may be surprised that somebody may actually go to the Supreme Court and get a stay of the very judgment that was made yesterday.
By the High Court.
By the High Court.
The Court of Appeal.
The Court of Appeal, rather. It is within their realm of rights as Kenyans. But the outlook that must suffice is that the constitution that we all agreed reigns supreme has become actually an endangered species. So the High Court, in its goodwill, moves to ensure that that particular element is not played around with. And this is for the sake of Kenyans. So many other court cases that you've just mentioned, people are already moving swiftly to ensure that they get that judgment favorably. But there's one footnote that I like, and they'll agree with me, all these gentlemen, that a unanimous bench said that whatever happens,
8th of August.
8th of August, and that's what I like. That, to me, that's why I keep saying this is a win for Wanjiku. 8th of August should actually not be played around with. And to me, that gives me the good piece that I'll enjoy as a voter. Having said that, please let's not run away from the issues that we have people who are still not geared to the goodwill of this entire process. IEBC, the current IEBC, came to being through what our good politicians called a political legal bypass. All right? We removed people out of office who are legally elected, validly holding and appointed, validly. And we went through Parliament, and Senator Orengo and Senator Murungi, through the parliamentary joint select committee, they all agreed on one beautiful umbrella called goodwill. Let's give IEBC good, and they all agreed. So what happened between then and now? That is the question.
Yes, and that is a question that we must ask. that goodwill that resulted in the amendments to the Elections Act put in place requirements and timelines. Now, IBC have breached some of those timelines, and you cannot argue that in the public interest or for the good of the nation, or because we have 17 days to go, that the fact that IBC is not meeting certain requirements of the law should not be challenged. For instance, publishing of the register, the audit report. Those are issues that pressure has had to be brought to bear on IBC to actually make public the audit. Yet that law that was passed, the amendments that were passed, were very clear that 30 days after the audit, they must submit it to Parliament, the entire audit report. They did not do that until pressure was brought to bear, and I think about 2 weeks ago, we saw the actual audit report, which had some serious issues that need to be addressed. Those issues have yet to be addressed. The register, they are to make the register public. To date, the register is not public. Now, if you recall, one of the issues of 2013 was that we did not have a register that was certified. We did not have a register that was identifiable, that this is the register. In fact, when the petition went to court, they came up with
called a green book.
Yes, we had three: a green book, a white book, and a black book.
It was a green book, white book, and the official register.
Now, so you see, now you can't go to an election with that. So the pressure for them, the case that AFRICOG have brought, that IBC must publish a register. We need to have a certified register, that this is the register that we are going to the elections with, so that
according to the law we should have had that on 22nd July.
Yes, 30 days to the election. We still don't have it. Okay, so for me, the fact that it is being challenged, that is within the rights of any citizen to challenge it, and IBC must be put on the spot, because the register is a very important document going for elections. The elections are central to the democratic process. So if we are going into the electoral process with ambiguity around the most critical thing to the election, which is the voters register, then that must be challenged, and it must be challenged heavily. And IBC must explain themselves. So when Mutuma talks about the goodwill and that it is being squandered, I think we also need to look at how IEBC is also rolling out its timelines, and how it is meeting those necessary timelines in terms of building confidence. Now, the fact that people ask questions around this doesn't mean that anybody wants to delay elections. I've heard that there are allegations of people wanting to postpone elections. But even when the law was passed, if I recall, and I think Senator Kajwang can remind us, the first person to actually mention a postponement of election was actually the AG. The AG in July, actually, July last year,
legal advisor,
proposed that we consider, postponing the election. There was a delay on the president's part to sign the amendments into law. Yep. 2 weeks delay, and people began to ask, why is the president delaying? This is going to affect the timeline. So when we don't look at the delays that have been that were already worked into the system, and now we begin to say that let's overlook things because now the time is getting shorter, I think that's unacceptable. We cannot circumvent processes and then cite timelines that we cannot challenge them legally.
Talking of timelines and processes, I want to have a flashback. 2013 elections. There is a former commissioner who has written in a book that the announcement of Uhuru Kenyatta as a winner was rushed because there was fear that if a certain time reached and he is not announced, the whole process would be invalid. Timeline. It made a legal process rushed. Fast forward, the Supreme Court, the ruling on the presidential elections. What do the judges say? Timeline. We have to announce this within a certain time. And so, we will quickly read the ruling and give you the ruling later, the ruling in detail. Timelines. And now you people are here, seated here, supporting the Court of Appeal, telling me the Constitution says that timeline for election is 8th of August. Are you saying, regardless of whether the process is free, fair, credible, and acceptable, we must just do it on 8th of August? Deputy Governor Ghurair.
Well, I think then this process has one of the things on the checklist, read what is called timelines as you look at issues. We've all known that the Constitution says second Tuesday of August every 5 years. what delayed the process? At some point, people sat on the road so that IEBC could be changed. At some point, people were fighting on the streets that we need a new IEBC. What did that do? It delayed the process which could have been ongoing if there was no change of the IEBC. That is my feel. Had the IEBC that was led by Isaac Hassan continued being in office, the things they could have progressively done in time. However, when the Constitution said 7 days of appeal or 14 days of appeal, those people of legal mind like Senator Kajwang are the people who can look at it and readdress it from a legislative perspective. Do we need to put it differently? It has not come through in the last 4.5 years.
So once again, our legislators failed us here.
They should have looked at it, and Senator Kajwang would agree with me. If it is deemed right, then from a legislative perspective, then we may need to look at whether timelines of appeal and all that should be extended or narrowed down to ideal situations to have all things.
Senator Kajwang, you are part of the brigade that sat on the streets, I quote him, to have IEBC commissioners go home. You knew we are going for elections on 8th August. Why didn't you sit on the streets earlier? So
let's not cheapen our legitimate
it's not about cheapening it. And actually said quoting.
Yes. So, because you know, sitting on the streets has been used in political rallies to make some of us sound like we are crazy, but we are just pursuing our legitimate political rights.
And my question therefore is, why didn't you sit earlier?
The report, I reflected and I looked at the report that was submitted to Parliament by the Windsor Committee. It was submitted 1 year, 1 month ago. We have had 1 year to do the things that we are now rushing to do in 17 days. So it is not a blame on the legislature, it is a blame on implementation. The delay that Daisy talks about, when the President delayed to sign into law the instruments that arose out of the consensus at Windsor, it is that duration of delay that Ghurair was given the tender to print the ballot papers. We know a lot of things. That's why I keep saying chicken get happened in this country. And let it not happen again that 3-4 years down the line we'll be having another chicken get involving Ghurair. The date of the election is cast in stone. It is in the Constitution. Our duty as Parliament, the duty of the judiciary and any other institution is to interpret and implement the Constitution. And so, back to your question, must we do elections on 8th, whether we are prepared or not? We have to do the elections on 8th of August, because that is what the Constitution states, and the Constitution is the expression of the will of the people of Kenya. That is just a summation of what the people of Kenya want. In fact, even
the same Constitution that says the election has to be free, fair, credible, and acceptable?
Yes. And we have had time to build that. There's a question of goodwill. You know, we cannot use goodwill as a cover-up for incompetence. And whenever we ask questions around the IEBC, and whenever people like Gladwell go to court and other members of the public go to court to compel IEBC to do certain things, they are not doing it out of mischief. They are not doing it because they want to belittle the goodwill that has been accorded to the IEBC. They are doing it because they want the right thing to be done. There were two things that we demanded when we sat on the streets, as you say. One was a vacation of office.
Have I quote?
Yes. The vacation of office by the IEBC commissioners, because we felt that they were partisan. There's a second matter that really did not gain prominence. At that point, we wanted a fresh voters register. It was a very fundamental demand. In fact, when out of Windsor, there was a consensus that we just audit the existing voters register. I remember there was a section of opposition MPs, and I was part of that brigade. We felt we needed to protest and say that that was reducing our minimum demands to a level that was unacceptable. But for the sake of the nation, we said, fine, probably the audit is going to allow us to get rid of dead voters and to get rid of the underage voters that we suspected were in the voters' roll. We still have to push the IEBC to release the results of the audit. We still had to push the IEBC to have a consultative process to appoint an auditor to look into the voters register. So there are issues of incompetence that we cannot sweep under the carpet for the sake of goodwill.
we cannot also run away from the fact that this IEBC, the commissioners as presently constituted, have not been in office for...
But we also must remember that IBC is not just the commission.
It's a secretariat.
There is an entire secretariat. It is an institution, and many of the officers have been there since 2013.
We'll be taking a short commercial break, but before then, Gabriel and Daisy, you've not chipped in on the issue of timeline. Must we just go with the timelines? Because clearly, here is a case of blame game. They're saying because these people sat on the streets, that's why we have the delay. They are saying because the president sat on the amendments for over a week, that's why there is a delay.
Charles,
at the end of the day, when the elections are bungled, it is not them, it is not their children, it is the common Wananchis who will be suffering.
You see, if I go with the, if we go with the issue of timelines and the reason why they are important, and I'm not saying we go or rush into just declaring timelines that don't make sense or not really making sense, timelines which may actually overlap the credibility of that particular process. That's actually not what I'm calling for, but we must abide with an element of good planning, which actually brings us to the particular date, which is August 8th. But if I go with the narrative that Senator Kajwang has just talked about, and this has to do with the auditing, looking at the auditor's report, and again the issue of voter, the voter register. I am not against that. In fact, that is part and parcel of what IBC must submit to NGICO, and that is okay. But if these were the prayers that they took to court, that can be understood. If NASA took to court such prayers, that can be understood. But when you take prayers that Ghurair and the president's family, they are in cahoots, when you take prayers such that the procurement was not done properly, yet you know very well that IBC has come and told you, please tell us about this, give us the evidence that you're talking about. Kindly, they know very well that the Ghurair that they are talking about, that went to State House, and the one that's printing the ballot papers are two different entities, and they know.
Actually, all those agreements were thrown out by the High Court.
Exactly. They were thrown out. The contempt actually that they were brought into court, that's the very same contempt that they were thrown out with. You know what? If now Senator Kajwang is telling me we brought to court this issue of auditing, this issue of voter register, that could be understood. And in fact, Kenyans, NGICO herself would support that process, because from where I'm seated, I really want, and I'm really looking forward to having a credible and a transparent election. Reason being, no Kenyan, mainly those that are in the business sphere, nobody wants to have a repeat of what we saw. And that's why we are praying every day. And from where we are seated, we need this. We are actually coveting this from IBC, and that's why I keep saying IBC has got no option than to offer NGICO what she's demanding for.
Daisy, very quickly before we take the commercial break, timeline
is cast in stone, and I think that it's important that we have, we're definitely having elections on the 8th of August, but we mustn't entertain institutional ineptitude simply because people don't do what is required of them. And I do agree with Gabriel about this issue of the allegations that have been made against Ghurair, because they have not been substantiated. You cannot take newspaper cuttings and cite that as evidence. I think on that score, the credibility of NASA's allegations really didn't stand the test of scrutiny. And it's also important to note that Ghurair have been printing ballots in Kenya, I think, since 2014.
In all the by-elections.
Exactly. So I think that this matter has now been laid to rest. We should not raise this issue again. But IBC have a responsibility to Kenyans. And the issue of the voters register and the audit report, the issues that the audit report have raised about the working of technology. Remember, in 2013, that was a problem. Technology must work. There is no reason that technology should not work. But to be fair, IBC have also really spoken to us about this issue. They have consistently and persistently told us that they are ready, that the technology is in place, that they are ready for everything. What they need to show us in terms of their ability to actually give us a credible process Can we have that register? Can they address themselves to the inconsistencies that were raised by the audit report and put those fears to rest? 17 days is much more than enough time for that to happen. And I think my plea is to the politicians, both the opposition and the ruling party, please, we cannot continually cast aspersions on this process, because at the end of the day, they are not the only stakeholders.
Right.
All Kenyans are stakeholders, and IBC need to really assert their independence and stop playing to the whims of the political class.
There you are. We have to give goodwill to the electoral body in 17 days' time. We'll be taking a short commercial break. When we come back, we'll be looking at other emerging issues in the dailies today with Senator Moses Kajwang, Deputy Governor Ghurair, Daisy Amdany, and of course Gabriel Muthuma. Right back after this.